Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are diving into yet another Star Wars book. This time it is Stories of Jedi and Sith, featuring a ton of different authors who have written on Star Wars or are writing for the very first time, edited by Jen Heddle over at Disney Lucasfilm Books. So we are so excited because you and I both loved Stories of Light and Dark back in the year 2020, the Clone Wars anthology. So here we are getting an anthology that sort of spans more of the Skywalker Saga. So we're really excited.
Yeah, only are these stories great for readers of all ages, but these books look gorgeous.
Oh my gosh.
On a shelf.
Yeah.
Holy
the celebration
moly.
cover too. Like when you slip off the case with the Obi-Wan case and it's the Darth Vader underneath, it feels very like, oof.
These are just absolute must-haves in general because I love reading from all the different authors, and also the art is on both of these has been so beautiful, and it's like a nice sized book. It's very much of a storybook quality to it. So it's really just an excellent book, and I can't wait to dive into all the stories with you today.
Yeah. But before we get started, we had a very important announcement up front that we wanted to talk about and address because we think it's very important here. We had a couple of episodes that came out last week that we weren't able to get to this in time because they had already been edited. So we thought we could do it here as it will be going out the week of July 4th. So Sarah, did you want to kick us off?
Yes. So we are recording this just a couple of days after June 24th, 2022, which is when the Supreme Court announced their decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and Casey, which means that abortion is no longer a constitutional right in the United States, and abortion access throughout the various states is very different, very limited, and really a concern for people who have people who can give birth across the country. It's very hard to talk about because it is very upsetting and saddening, and I just want to scream at the sky all day long. But the thing that we can do together is to resist, to fight back, to put pressure on our elected officials, to put pressure on our communities to do better and be better. And it comes back to this line from Jyn Erso: what chance do we have? The question is, what choice? Run, hide, plead for mercy, scatter your forces. You give way to an enemy this evil and with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to eternity of submission. The time to fight is now. And that was the inspiration for What Choice? The Star Wars fandom uniting for abortion access. We are a part of this campaign, have been a part of this campaign from the start, and are proud to be a part of it. It was started by Rachel, who is, I believe, built on Stardust on Twitter, alongside followers of the Force and an incredible group of Star Wars community members who are just all joining together to unite and raise funds specifically for the National Abortion Federation. And the National Abortion Federation is the professional association of abortion providers. Their mission is to unite, represent, and serve and support abortion providers in delivering patient-centered, evidence-based care. Their members include individuals, private and nonprofit clinics, Planned Parenthood affiliates, women's health centers, physicians' offices, and the hospitals in both the United States and in Canada. And we thought that they were kind of an important group because not only do they represent and serve abortion providers, but they also deliver information and resources to people who are seeking abortions throughout the US and Canada. And obviously, this is an important issue, and one that not only affects people's access to abortion, but generally people's bodily autonomy, their ability to live the life that they desire, the ability to have a family on their own terms, the ability to live where they would like, and earn money in the way that they would like. It's an important issue, and I hope that you are with us on this issue because it is one that's deeply important to me, and it is one that affects over half of the population in the US, both people who identify as like cisgender women and people who do not. And I don't have anything more eloquent to say about it. I just would appreciate your support on this one. And yep, thanks for listening.
Yeah, the thing I'll add to that as well is like we posted the fundraiser on our Twitter, and somebody was like, "Don't bring politics into this." And what I would say to that is access to safe abortion, abortion health care, bodily autonomy. Those are all fundamental human rights. Like this is not something that can be argued. Like these are things that people have as fundamental rights. So like when those things are stripped away from people, it's terrible. There's like no other word for it. I just am deeply pissed off. So, turning that around and trying to join alongside so many other voices in the fandom who are affected by this, who care deeply for this. It's really cool to see that we've already, as a united front, have raised $28,000 at the time of this recording. And I mean, that's just after like a day that this fundraiser has been up. So it's really incredible and really powerful to see like what the Star Wars fandom can do when we all unite. And it's really great to see like how many people want to contribute. So we thought it was very important to bring up. We will not shy away from talking about these issues in the future because they are, like Sarah said, they are important to us. And if you don't like that, then I'm not really sure what else to tell you. I think a lot of our audience will side with us on this, but this is your first time listening to the podcast and you don't agree with what we're saying, then this might not be the place for you. But Sarah, did you have one other thing to add as well?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to mention that all of these rights that we have, all of these issues that are really salient in our lives are all interconnected. The fight for abortion access and for reproductive rights is not separate from the fight of the queer community, is not separate of the fight for, of Black Lives Matter. It's these things are all interconnected. So if you do not have the ability to, give today to the National Abortion Federation, consider volunteering, consider using your other resources and talents to maybe not give to this campaign, but something local to you, something that is really important and near to your heart. These things are all interconnected. So we encourage you to not only support What Choice, but also the Amidala Initiative supporting trans kids in Texas, to support local abortion funds in your area, to support, it's one part of the thing, but like installing lawmakers who are going to fight for your issues is a piece of this. Whatever you can do, and whatever makes the most sense for your abilities to contribute, consider doing that. And also take care of yourself in all of this too, because it's a difficult time. And we're all dealing with a lot. So reach out when you can, but also take time when you need to.
Definitely. And it's just so unfortunate that as a country, it seems like anytime we take a few steps forward, we go many steps back. And this is an instance of going many steps back where people now have unequal rights, even more so than what's been existing so far in this country. We got to make our voices heard and show that there are more of us, because it is a fundamental right to make your own choices for your own body, and to have access to the healthcare that you need and the reproductive healthcare that you need. There's no other words for it. So yeah, there's no easy way to transition out of this. Like what I will say is like, we'll continue retweeting stuff on our Twitter as well, and trying to get some visibility to how to contribute, whether it's like GoFundMe or other ways to get involved. So just keep an eye on our socials for that. But speaking of like helping your community and lifting others up, as we do in every episode, we like to talk about a bookstore when we go into our book discussions. So this is actually a bookstore that was recommended by one of our patrons, Levi. And as always, we do this because we love highlighting indie bookstores and trying to give them people's business. So take it away, Sarah.
Yes. So as Brad said, this one was highlighted by our patron, Levi. Thank you so much, Levi, for sending this bookstore in. I am so glad to hear not only about this bookshop, but that it's a new bookshop. And I hope that you all listening seek it out, look them up. If you're in the area, go check them out. And so they are Sidetrack Bookshop. They're a new queer-owned bookstore in Royal Oak, Michigan. At this point, they're still kind of building their inventory, getting things set up, but they are open and they are happy to sell you some books. And they recently just launched a sticker with all of the proceeds going to local abortion funds. But they have a bookshop. What is it called? A bookshop online store. So instead of shopping with Amazon, you can shop with Bookshop and then support Sidetrack Bookshop if you would like. They also do audiobooks. And right now, while they're building their website, they have a Facebook and Instagram and also a couple of pre-order campaigns that they're running. So if you are in the area of Royal Oak, Michigan, or you have the ability to support them online, please go check them out. Please give them your eyeballs and your business if you're able. Again, they are in Royal Oak, Michigan. And currently, the best way to find out all their information is linktree/sidetrack books. So that's linktr.ee/sidetrack books until they get that website up and running, which will then be sidetrackbooks.com. Hopefully I'll be in Michigan at some point and can check them out.
Yeah. One of my good friends is from Royal Oak, Michigan. I've been there. It's a nice little town.
Do they still live there? Because I was like, if you better call them up.
Yeah. His parents live there. So maybe if I ever go visit him when he's there.
Send him a text.
Yeah.
Be like, go to the new bookshop.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, as always, we love supporting indie bookstores. They need your business. They are working hard to, do some really great work. And we love booksellers here on this podcast. So, as we said, we're talking about stories of Jedi and Sith today. So what we thought we would do is give our overall thoughts on the book right up front, and then go through each story and pull out a couple of things that we really enjoyed, that really made us think a little harder, that we really thought stood out and maybe fit into the theme of that particular story, because there's 10 stories total. So lots to sift through and lots of good stuff. I always love these anthologies because they just add a little more pizzazz to Star Wars, the Star Wars galaxy, and giving us a really close focus on a specific character and their point of view, and enriching what we know about them. We get a Barriss Offee story in this, which, Barriss Offee's featured prominently in the Clone Wars series, and it was really cool to see like her perspective leading up to that point that she gets to, and even other characters like Qui-Gon or Darth Maul was a really fascinating one as well. So Sarah, what were your overall impressions of this book, and how do you feel like it kind of built off what's come before for this sort of storytelling?
I think that this one is overall really interesting. There are some great stories in here. What's great about it being a middle grade level anthology of stories is that they're all bite-sized. There's something you could read with a young person before bed. There's something, if you're like, I'm just in the mood for 20 minutes, one story, you can absolutely pick them up one at a time. Or you can kind of binge read them all through, and you'll get kind of a couple of connecting points throughout some of the stories, either through themes and also through a couple of things that move through all the stories, or just a couple of them. So there's like connection points that are fun to pick up on. In terms of this sort of storytelling, I just think it's valuable because it allows more authors to write their version of Star Wars, and for us as Star Wars readers to discover more authors. And I always enjoy doing that. I think that's why From a Certain Point of Views are so fun, because there's 40 of them and you're like, wow, I can't wait to read every other person's, non-Star Wars work. And for this, it's the same way. So overall, this was just a delightful read. And there are some stories in here that are surprisingly heavy, and that kind of dig at some really valuable themes, I think, for young people and for adults alike.
Yeah, some of these authors that we haven't seen since the last From a Certain Point of View anthology, like you have Karen Strong, you have Delilah Dawson, Roseanne Brown's a new author to Star Wars, so it was really cool to see her as well. Tessa Gratton, who's writing one of the upcoming High Republic books. I think two of them actually. They have the young adult novel with Justina, and then another one soon after that. So lots of really great talent on this project. Speaking of which, I hope they do another From a Certain Point of View in the future. That would be really awesome for Return of the Jedi. Fingers crossed.
I
praying.
feel like they have to at this point, but I'm also just so sorry for the editors. Like that's just like a lot of like balls to juggle at the same time,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I imagine
The
if they
bookshelf
do,
needs that third slot. Like it can't have an empty slot.
It totally does. But I will say, like, I hope that they do it, and if they do, I know that we're gonna get amazing stories. And I mean, if it were entirely an Ewoks anthology, I would not say no. Give me the perspective of every Ewok on Endor. Or like every person in Jabba's palace
from a certain point of Ewok.
Maybe they could, what they could do? They could make 3 anthologies. One of them is all Jabba's palace, one of them is all Ewoks, and then one of them is just like everything else, I guess.
Yeah, it's like the editors don't need sleep. It's fine. They'll just, pull an all-nighter, drink a 5-hour energy or a Red Bull, and call it a day/night/afternoon/
Yeah, I mean, who needs livable working conditions? Who needs livable working conditions? Not book editors. I'm kidding. I love book editors so much. They're serious, but like seriously, editors are amazing because they are ideas people and they help craft story, and they're also just got a really keen eye. I have so much respect for editors.
Yeah. And as we mentioned too, Jennifer Heddle did this book as well. I believe she did the first one too, the one from 2020, the Clone Wars anthology. So overall this whole book is really put together well. The art is by Jake Bartok, who does a ton of fan art on Twitter, and his art is just simply incredible. It was I expected him to eventually be involved with something, because it's just every time he posts something, people are like foaming at the mouth over it. So I especially love his High Republic 3 posters in the style of Drew Struzan, his special edition posters. So that's like one of my favorite pieces from him. But the art in this is simply breathtaking. The cover art, even when you slip off the slipcase, is just amazing underneath. It's just so good. And especially in the age of Kenobi, having Vader and Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan and Anakin on the back of the book is really cool.
But wait a second. We had the whole, if you go listen to our Obi-Wan Part 6 discussion, we had talked about like color theory in the spoiler alert thing. And I feel like we are totally getting that on the original cover of this book and what's printed onto the book itself, which I love so much.
Yes. Yeah, because Vader is a character that has many layers, including those of Jedi and Sith, right? So it's cool
it really all ties together, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. Like the perfect character to feature on the cover for this. But yeah, I think we should just get started. So we're going to start with the first story, What a Jedi Makes by Michael Kaji. This is actually a High Republic story, which I was not expecting, because we knew we were getting Yoda, but I did not think it was going to be High Republic Yoda. And I thought that was really cool, because if you know anything about us, we love the High Republic. It's one of our favorite things. So what did you think, Sarah, of getting more High Republic content just when we thought it was done for a little bit?
I was delighted to see more High Republic content, because like, am I ever going to say no? The answer is no. I'm always going to say yes. So it was really interesting to see Yoda at this time, to see kind of Coruscant and the Jedi at this time, and the discussion of midichlorians, just to hint at what we might talk about. But the discussion of midichlorians is interesting as well.
Yeah. We get some new characters. There's Detective Tals Trilby. Elohim Nara is the central protagonist of the story, who comes from the lower levels of Coruscant and wants to be a Jedi. And then Reyna Bilas, or also Reyna Ganzi. I'm probably butchering all these names, but it's fine. I'm trying my best.
It's Star Wars. There are 8 different ways to pronounce any of them.
Yeah. Han, it's all good.
Leia.
Yeah. But what I liked the most about this story was it gave us the point of view of somebody who lives below the surface of Coruscant, because we know one of the defining characteristics of the High Republic is like, we are all the Republic, like we are all together. It kind of gives a sense that like we are all equal, but clearly there are still many inequities in the Star Wars galaxy under Lina Soh's rule. And so there's a little bit of dissonance between what she wants the Republic to be and like what it currently is, right? And I think that's seen through Elohim's eyes when he says, he thinks to himself, quote, "In reality, there were many who remained on society's fringes despite Soh's efforts to eliminate old prejudices. rich surface dwellers on Coruscant still feared outcasts like the boy who would infect their districts with disease, poverty, and crime. No one would shed a tear at his disappearance. And what I like the most about the story is it really puts that at the forefront. Not only a story about becoming a Jedi and believing in yourself to become a Jedi, but also showing those the societal inequity and how people on the surface of Coruscant are treated and looked at so differently than the people who live on those lower levels, right? It's like when he puts on the Jedi costume and goes to the surface, like he's treated so differently. Like the cops are asking him for his help and they're asking if he has seen anybody, like, any burglars around the area. And he thinks to himself, like, wow, so that was what it was to be a Jedi. The cops came to help for you. They came to you for help, right? So I was like, I read that line and I was like, wow, yeah, it's pretty wild, the amount of prejudice that the Republic has. And we even see that in the prequel trilogy too.
Yeah, of course. And I think that the description that Lohim talks about serves to maybe act as a bit of commentary on the way that we treat people we see other than ourselves in our own world. And it's valuable to kind of see this perspective and get a better understanding of one's humanity. I think that that's something that stories can do so well, is show us somebody that we don't maybe see in our day-to-day lives, or that we perceive to be different than us, and remind us of that person's humanity. And that's what this story does a good job of throughout it, as we see Lohim kind of deal with his situation, make a plan, try and work his way out of his own situation, only to get beat down until he really could prove himself. And the thing is, with this whole story, is that he shouldn't have to get beat down and turned away by everybody throughout it, because he's a person just like they are. He should be given a chance, given a moment of respect. And the Reyna, the Jedi initiate, doesn't really want to give him that time of day, even though we learn that she came from the same place that he did, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting that it's set in the High Republic, because it is a reminder that even though it's the golden age of the Republic, and it's like Camelot, and it's Lena So, and it's we are all the Republic for light and life, that not everything is equal, and that there's still slavery, there's still things in going on, and still poverty. And even though they're dealing with some of these things, as we see with Into the Dark and the way that they kind of dismantle the Bind Guild quite quickly, that they're still turning a blind eye in some other areas, or not providing all the help that they could or should. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And on top of this whole like sort of societal, like social commentary that's happening, which I think is an important one, especially for younger readers. This is geared towards like middle grade readers. I also think that at the heart of it is about like what makes a Jedi. And that's the whole conversation that Yoda has with Lohim at the end, when Lohim says that he forged his midichlorian test results and he wanted to appear like he had more than what was there. And I love how Yoda says like midichlorians aren't what makes a Jedi. Like neither is the Force. It's just something that you have to find. Like you have to find the answer of like what makes a Jedi, right? Because it's unique to each person, and I think that speaks volumes to like what kind of era the High Republic is, where each person like views the Force differently, right? Like to somebody like Elzar Mann, he views the Force differently than somebody like Avar Kriss, right? And that's the greatest thing about this era, is it's so diverse in both who makes up the Order, as well as each of those people's experiences in life and like where they come from. And for somebody like Lohim, he will make a great Jedi, whatever capacity that he serves, like whether it is a temple guard or whether it's somebody who offers assistance or somebody who is a warrior, right? Like there are all sorts of different roles that he can fill. And so it's sort of up to him, and Yoda leaves it up to him to figure out what that is going to be. And I think that's the most beautiful part of the story, is like they don't put him in a box based on where he came from. They kind of by the end, they open their doors and say like, it is what you want it to be, right? And you have to find that.
Yeah, it is really interesting, though, that we learn that Lohim is 14 throughout the story, because we know that in the High Republic, the Jedi are not training Zine because she's around the same age and she's too old to be trained. So it makes me wonder what Yoda thinks that Lohim's path could be within, if it's going to be within the Jedi, because we kind of have see them do different things, because still we at this time expect all of the Jedi to be brought into the order when they're about 1, which is what happened with Reyna. So that's another kind of just interesting a seed that's perhaps planted here with this story and with the High Republic. I will say the other thing that I really enjoyed, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, is this discussion about midichlorians, and you've brought it up as well. Midichlorians have been a hot topic, I think, throughout like fandom history, because when Qui-Gon measures Anakin's midichlorians and he's like, wow, they're really high, they're off the charts, there's so many of them. That's part of the reason that he thinks that he could be the chosen one. Is it not? It definitely is, right? Like I haven't watched Phantom Menace in a couple of days. A couple
Even
days.
greater than Master Yoda.
Right. So it's been a minute, but that becomes a key point for him. However, we don't really see midichlorians used as a barometer of the Force throughout the rest of the saga broadly. And so for Reyna to say, no master with any common sense cares about blood tests. When they search for younglings, they need proof of talent, not paperwork. And so it seems like clearly there's a role that midichlorians play in understanding the potential Force abilities, the potential Force sensitivity of any person, but that they're not the key factor in understanding whether somebody's going to be a great Jedi or not. And that's kind of what we come to at the end as well from Yoda's affirmation, as you discussed earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's been where the whole midichlorian conversation has been going for years. I feel like the new stories that we're getting is really trying to push that it isn't a science, right? Even though it's brought up in The Mandalorian, the M count with Grogu and Dr. Pershing looking at that, which is interesting. But yeah, I think ultimately midichlorians don't make a Jedi. Midichlorians are a measure of sensitivity, but I don't think they're the ultimate measure. I think you can still be very powerful with the Force and connect to it without having a high midichlorian count. And that's the whole point of the story. And you make a good point too about the age at which Lohim is brought in, and I love that Master Yoda says like, too old to learn. Like I'm 600 or 700 and I'm still learning.
Mm-hmm.
Which is funny when you think about how their initial resistance to Anakin is he's too old to begin training. But
Yoda,
I wonder if that's a change in mentality for the Jedi Order over time, where maybe they realize they shouldn't be doing that anymore. Not having as much open arms to people who are too old, like Lohim or like Anakin. So I wonder if that does change, but I love that he's given a shot, because it's a really great story about kind of coming up from below and rising to the top, literally in the story, and showing that people can surprise you too.
Yeah, I want to talk about that literally thing that you just mentioned, because I think that this story opens with a wonderful description of the temple. May I read it?
Sure.
Cool. It was a massive structure of stone with a trapezoidal body on a rectangular base. 5 towers crowned its flat top, 4 on each corner, with a 5th and tallest rising from the center. According to legend, it had been erected on the summit of a mountain, when mountains still dominated the planet's terrain. After millennia of expansion, the temple itself was the only mountain in this district of the city, drawing the eye from every direction. I just really liked that. And then it goes on to talk about how you can often or sometimes glimpse a Jedi in their robes through one of the windows, although it doesn't tell you much, about what they're doing. And I found that description to all be really interesting and really visual. And also kind of throughout these stories, we get mentions of Yoda and his gardens a couple of times here. And then we also have an understanding that there is this was a super mountainous terrain here on Coruscant at one point, and that has broadly disappeared. And that's all that's left is the idea of mountains through these structures, and also like the one peak, if you recall from the High Republic, where there's a garden where you can see like the peak of the tallest mountain.
Yes, that was in Light of the Jedi, I believe.
Yeah, and it's like the only thing uncovered. So I just find continuous descriptions, or every time we get a new description of Coruscant or the Jedi Temple, to be really eye-opening. And I hope we continue to get more of, like the setting and the surrounding areas for those places in the future in shows, and other things. That's me going, Coruscant and Andor, please. Which I know we're going to get, because we do see.
And the Acolyte too, eventually.
Yeah, more Coruscant for Sarah, please. That's what I would like to order today.
Oh man, that's the Coruscants. Are we going to start saying that now? The Coruscants.
Coruscants. That's all you got to do.
Wow, yeah. It's the Coruscants, baby. We got it in Kenobi. We're getting it in Andor. We're probably going to get it elsewhere. So yeah, maybe Mando season 3. I'm hopeful. Maybe we'll see the New Republic eventually, or what's become of Coruscant. So just some other things of note that were really interesting. I guess a little mini odds and ends. We're going into this story pretty deeply, because anytime it says High Republic, we become instant shills. So shadow suits. They make you invisible.
Shadow suits. Is this going to pop up in the High Republic again? Because I have a sideways eyeball emoji.
Yeah, I think it probably will. I mean, it's introduced here. I don't think it's technology that we've necessarily seen, but maybe it could be deployed in the future. Who knows? That would be pretty cool. They also mentioned the temple guards, which we haven't seen from any of the books yet, but now we see them here for the first time in this era. And I loved how it talked about there were 3 temple guards that allegedly turned back an army of 3,000 generations ago, which I loved. So I think we should get more temple guard stories, in my opinion. I would love to see what it is to be in the life of a temple guard, and how they become one, and like what the path is to that, and like also what that duty of being a temple guard entails, especially because we know like a temple guard is the Grand Inquisitor was one before. So just give me more temple guard content, is what I'm saying.
Is this person the Grand Inquisitor, and they just live a super, super long life, and they become a temple guard and they become the Grand Inquisitor? I mean,
maybe
they're not.
Maybe. We don't know the lifetime of Pounds, but
but we know that Lohim is not a Pound, because he talks about how he's a person,
right?
Like a human that doesn't get seen as a human because of the dirt and grime, and the way that he's looked at. But anyway, could the Powans be alive right now that we see in the prequel trilogy?
Oh wait, their average lifespan is up to 700 years.
Oh my God, Tion Medin is so old.
Wait, could the Grand Inquisitor be alive during the High Republic? That's just a question I have, is what I'm getting at here. Anyways, this is a good question for another time, because we could probably like speculate on that for hours. But point is, give me some Temple Guard content.
Also, do we know who the 4 founders are? Do we have any more information on the 4 founders? It says when he walks up, there are four giant statues of the 4 founders.
There might be something in Legends. I'm looking at Wikipedia currently, and it says that the Legends continuity says there were founders that were named Jedi Masters Calibrin, Jaren Jard, Rajavara, and Ters Sendin. So those were the 4 founders.
Okay,
allegedly.
So allegedly, or you could say allegedly. In Legends.
And the prime Jedi were the founder of the Jedi Order. They were also the ones that established the Order on Ahch-To. The first Jedi Temple, actually was on Ahch-To, and that had that mosaic of the prime Jedi in a state of meditation and balance.
Oh, what's the source on that? What's the source on that?
This is on Wikipedia.
No, but what's the source on that entry into Wikipedia?
I'm not sure. I have to check here. It looks like the Last Jedi Visual Dictionary.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And we also know too, there's a meditation chamber on the Starlight Beacon that has that same mosaic of the Prime Jedi, because what's her face meditates in front of it. The one that Keith Trennis is meditating in front of. So yeah, fun stuff, interesting stuff. Maybe we'll get more about the founders of the Order. I think that would be cool.
And the last thing I want to say from this story is Farseeker Lear, who is meant to be a mentor of sorts, a guardian of sorts, that Yoda mentions that perhaps he should study the Farseeker Lear. So I would like to know more about Farseeker Lear. Brad, are you going to say something?
I just looked up on on the Wikipedia again.
Guys, he made
Farseeker.
he made like a wild face. That's why I
Yeah, because I did not expect this search result. They were first mentioned in Thrawn Ascendancy Greater Good.
Oh, clearly we have no idea what we're talking about ever. I'm so bad at remembering these details.
No, I didn't even know too. I was like, I'll give it a shot. And yeah, they were an organization of Force-sensitive navigators in the unknown regions. When Jixtus is talking to Keelori shitbag, Jixtus says, "I'll find you someone suitable, possibly a Farseeker or Void Guide."
Oh,
interesting.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
It's interesting too because like Farseeker, Wayseeker. So I wonder if there's a little bit of a connection there too. So interesting.
Farseeker, Wayseeker, Wayfinder. Holocron.
Farfinder is next.
Farfinder. There we go. But anyway, now I'm ready for all the books about those specific things.
But yeah, so we dove into that one pretty deeply because again, High Republic is our shit. Any new content that we get, we're going to pick apart ad nauseum. But let's move on now to Resolve by Alex Segura. This is a Qui-Gon Jinn story. Qui-Gon goes on a rescue mission for Padawan Lizelle Lit on the planet of Decinta. And Prefect Aminar, she's this sort of like the ruler, and she maintains power by architecting like internal strife on the planet. So this is all a secret ploy, basically, to turn Qui-Gon over to these people, and it ends up backfiring on her by the end, which I thought was a great move on Qui-Gon's part. He was just like, "Yeah, what they do now is up to them. It's not my concern." So you kind of face your own consequences of your own actions. But I thought the most interesting thing about the story was how it portrayed Qui-Gon's skepticism of the Order within the context of just losing Dooku recently. Like it seems like it's still a fresh wound. Did you get that impression?
Yeah, that it was kind of unfinished emotionally for Qui-Gon, for sure.
Yeah, it says that he was burned by the loss. He just got an apprentice, so he's optimistic about that, but not the process. And when he meets Lizelle is somebody who ran away from the Jedi Order because she wasn't sure of what her future would entail, and she didn't want to kind of face that choice. She asks Qui-Gon if he ever questions the Jedi ways, and she feels like it's all predetermined, and he says that questioning is in itself the Jedi way. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Which I thought was fascinating, right? Because that is so Qui-Gon. He is somebody that always questions and never just goes blindly, because he says in this that if people who go blindly are bound to trip and fall.
Yes, but he is not the Order. He's a bit of an outcast in that sense. He seems to be the only one that's so questioning, that's so outside of what we expect from the Jedi Order. So I find this response and this question interesting because from what I understand from Lysel's experience, she has been taught that you can't question the Jedi ways, that there's no space for that in her teachings. She's saying it all feels so predetermined that she has no say in the matter. So there's clearly a failure of teaching leadership here that Lysel feels so stuck. And so instead of talking about it with anybody, she runs away. She bottles it up so much that she leaves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even Qui-Gon thinks that indecision and uncertainty from someone so young should not disqualify them from returning. We do not all know our paths so early in life. And I thought that was such an important quote, right? Because I relate to that, right? We're so early in our careers, and we're often left wondering, like, what does the future hold? We face a lot of decisions that we have to make without really knowing how it's going to affect our lives later down the road. Like people always say, like, "Oh, take risks, you're young," right? And so I think it's very natural for a Padawan to be having those questions, because it's like, if I become a Jedi, do I have to be a Jedi my whole life, right? It's a lot of pressure to put on somebody, especially somebody like Anakin, who's going to be the chosen one, right? Like, hey, you're going to be the Jedi, but you're also going to have to bring balance to the Force. Like, this is your job for the rest of eternity, basically, until you die. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
It is. And what's really interesting about it is that you're kind of conditioned to it from the very beginnings of your life, from the very beginnings of your socialization. I mean, like, if you're an adult, right? If you're an adult in the real world and you decide to join a religious order, you're deciding to join a religious order with the full knowledge of what that religious order entails and what you can and cannot do, what is considered acceptable behavior and what is not considered acceptable behavior, et cetera, right? Like what you can wear, what you can't wear, what you believe, what you don't believe. The children who are brought into the Jedi Order have no say in any of that. They are brought up in this very particular mindset of how they should act, what they should believe. And that's not all bad, but especially in a culture like they're in that doesn't allow for a lot of questioning, it can be limiting and it can be weird to kind of have an understanding of like, not everybody lives like this. And I live like this and I understand why I live like this, but like, what other options are there? Can I try something new? Can I explore something new? And that's why, like, within Star Wars, the idea of the way seeker, like Orla, is so interesting because she kind of gets to go and do her own thing and then come back, whenever she's ready or whenever any way seeker is ready.
Yeah, what I think is interesting too, talking about all of this is like, again, it's coming on the heels of Qui-Gon Jinn leaving the Order, or sorry, not Qui-Gon, Dooku, and so I find it interesting that the Jedi Council is like, oh, we need you on the Council, Qui-Gon. We need your wisdom. Dooku was lost. Something pulled him away. We need you by our side. And to me, it seems like an act of desperation almost, because I think the Jedi Council wants to figure out, like, why did Dooku leave? And maybe if Qui-Gon joins the Council, he could offer some insight as to why that's happening, because we don't want it to happen again. But I think it's just such a lack of self-awareness on the Jedi Order's part. It's just, they don't see their own hubris, right? Mm-hmm. It's just completely blind to it. But that was one of my favorite aspects of this story. And particularly, this was on page 69, nice, was this quote: "Wasn't this what he lived for?" Qui-Gon wondered. "To fight, to defend Jedi beliefs? Or was this just another petty skirmish in a galaxy full of quibbles and wars? Even worse, was this just a sad, forgettable way to die?" Wow. I mean, that is the mindset of somebody who is disgruntled and doesn't really see the point of what they're doing fully, right? And it just feeds into his questioning of everything that he is now being expected to do. So besides Qui-Gon's skepticism, what else stood out to you with the story?
The end of it. And how Liesel and Qui-Gon kind of get through this story and where they end up at the end. I think Liesel asks Qui-Gon, like, what did you do? How did you get through it? Qui-Gon says, but over time, that fear and doubt became something else. It became resolve, a feeling of understanding and confidence in myself and what I was capable of. It would have been normal to resent him, to blame this other person's decisions for whatever errors I made, but that would also have been the easy path, the lazy path, and a passive one. And I just think that that is interesting, the way that our emotions change over time and how we can find resolution and peace in a situation. And I really like that he's imparting that message onto Liesel here at the end.
But yeah, overall, another great Qui-Gon story. We don't get much of his perspective in Star Wars. And I will say there were 2 Easter eggs that definitely stood out to me here. The mention of Zara Bliss, who sold Liesel to the crime gang, or the people on the planet. So that's obviously Zori Bliss's mom. And also Qui-Gon Jinn writing a father. We love it. We love TLJ in this house. So seeing him write a father, or envisioning him doing that, brings me joy. So with that being said, though, let's move on to our next story. Sarah, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, this is our Anakin and Obi-Wan story, The Eye of the Beholder by Sarwat Chadha. And this is a story that takes place on the planet of Devilok. And they are in the midst of the Clone War. And it's not going so well for these 2 kids who have been now alone in this city under siege for, I believe, 5 days. And Anakin and Obi-Wan come to help them.
Mm-hmm. This is one of your favorite stories from the book, right?
This is pretty much my favorite story from the book. There are a couple others, including What a Jedi Makes, that were towards the top for me, but this one is it. And the reason why for me is because it's actually really kind of heavy. And you're like, wow, Sarah, do you just like depressing stuff? And the answer is no, I don't. But I really do like it when we can talk about big issues, big feelings, and big ideas in kidlit. And I think that's one of the strengths of kidlit writers, is that they have the ability to dissect these big ideas down into the main points that children can grasp onto and understand and work through their emotions. And I think this one is prescient and important because it does talk about children in wartime and the ways that families can be broken, and the ways that people of all ages work to survive.
Yeah, and in the context of Star Wars too, how those people survive in the Republic during wartime. What I thought was interesting was how this idea throughout the story of how the kids view the Republic, how they have these preconceived notions about the Republic, and also like the rightfully placed distrust of the Republic, right? Because the Republic is the one leading this war that is ravaging so many planets now, including their own. And it was nice to see the kids like Zora and Dumuz, I believe the name is. By the end of the story, they have a little bit of restored faith in the Republic, and that, you know, there are heroes. They're not just the heroes that they hear about in their stories. At one point, Zora reads that old tale to her brother to make him feel better. And it's really cool to see that it's not just in the stories, right? It gives me Broom Boy vibes in a way, you know, like how the kids are
in like the best way.
Right. Like the kids are playing with their toys at the end of Last Jedi, and they're like, you know, Luke Skywalker, and they're telling the story, and they're like playing with their action figures, and Broom Boy goes outside and sees what we think is the Millennium Falcon go into hyperspace. And it's like, no, that's a real, it's real. It's happening out there. Right. And for Obi-Wan and Anakin to show up on their doorstep, that changes their whole perception and their faith and their hope during this really terrible time.
Yeah, that did have a very Legends of Luke Skywalker-esque ending. It says she closed her eyes. There they were. Anakin, his smile and warmth, and Obi-Wan, formal but dedicated. They were Jedi Knights, and one day they came to Devilock. And yeah, I love that. It's very kind of a hopeful ending. And this story, despite it being heavy in the first half, is hopeful because Dumuz can... He feels like he's feeling his parents and that they're alive and that they're somewhere. And ultimately, because he has the trust of Anakin and Obi-Wan, they go looking for his parents, and ultimately they find them alive. And I think that was a really helpful ending to the story that could have just been very, very bleak throughout. But it's like trusting in children, you know, in their instincts. It's hope and how we create hopeful times during dark times. And it connects to one of my favorite things, which is Legends of Luke Skywalker and Last Jedi. So like, I can't complain. I
also love too how Zora thinks that the Jedi had done all this for them, even though they weren't special or they weren't like essential personnel for the war effort. Like they had risked it all just for them. Whereas in the beginning of the story, she talks about how she's heard like people being abandoned on asteroids, like these camps that people are brought to when they're displaced from their home, and that the Republic doesn't actually care about them. And it's good to see that she's like, oh wow, they're like, these Jedi did help us. Like we're nobodies basically. And I love a good story about a Star Wars nobody, right? Like the everyday people of the galaxy who are still so important, even if they don't have force powers or they're not part of the fight, right? Like these people needed help, and Anakin and Obi-Wan were there to offer it. And it makes me think of Ahsoka in the Clone Wars when she says, you know, when you see people in need, you help them. Like that's just as basic as that. That's why she helps Trace and Rafa. So we see that really continuing here. And we know Anakin is somebody who will help anybody in need and wants to do his best to save lives, especially those of children. So it's something that's probably deeply personal to him, having grown up as a slave on Tatooine, and not the best conditions as a child, wanting I wonder if he sees some of that in these kids as well. Like, these kids that really just need an escape plan with their parents.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The other thing that I want to touch on throughout here in this idea of hope and helping others is the idea of the gardens throughout this story. This is where, when I'm talking about one of those points that just shows up throughout some of these stories, and it's the gardens on Coruscant. So on page 91, they're talking about their mother, and it says, Mom had studied in Coruscant. She'd show them hollow images of the Jedi Temple. She'd worked for a year in their garden and seen Master Yoda sitting amongst the flowers. Her mom had been too frightened to say anything to them and had regretted it ever since. And then later they talk about the fruit. They talk about the greenhouses that planet Devilock has. And one thing that I really like throughout this story is how we get not only this perspective of war, but also this perspective of nature and growth and greenery. And we can see within the context of war, the symbolism of the trees and the fruits and the plants as rebirth. And I think that is powerful throughout, and one that is important to Demuse and Zora and the culture of Devilock for them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a fascinating story. Like I love this, and I love how like Obi-Wan and Anakin take on the legend status that you only ever hear about on the HoloNet, right? The two heroes and saving the day with their light swords. It's pretty cool.
What's awesome about the legend status is that a new legend is inspired by every mind and heart that they touch.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of legends of Luke Skywalker, legends of Anakin and Obi-Wan that in some heightened ways get like elevated on the hollow images and the HoloNet, but also there are all these personal stories that go between families and become like an oral tradition as opposed to something that is promoted in the media. And so there's kind of like a lot of different ideas of heroism and legends in the story, which I like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. You're a huge Legends of Luke Skywalker fan, so I can definitely see why.
Am I?
The story hit a note with you. Yeah,
I've never talked about Legends of Luke Skywalker before in my life.
Well, let's move on to our next one, which is A Jedi's Duty by Karen Strong. This is a Barriss Offee story, which I was really just excited to see this character pop up unexpectedly. And Barriss is a character that we know quite a bit from during the Clone Wars series, and how she is involved with, Ahsoka's decision to leave the Order, and we see like a very disillusioned Barriss Offee by that point, which, she makes a lot of great points about how the Jedi is really getting away from what it was meant to be, and that's sort of what she deals with in this story. Like post Battle of Geonosis, like the screams of that are still filling her with torment. And she just feels like the Jedi are losing their ways, like their commanders, their generals. She doesn't want to be a warrior, but she does want to protect people, and she's going to do anything possible to offer assistance in that realm. But I love getting the perspective of somebody who literally at the onset of the Clone Wars, and I think Mil Alabeth is another character that we recently got this perspective from.
Hashtag save Mil Alabeth.
Yes. It was really cool to see now like Barriss have that sort of same perspective. And she has this whole conversation with Tutso Mara, and he says that the war has taken a lot of choices away from them, but quote, "We are fighting on behalf of the Republic to restore peace to the galaxy. Above all things, we must remember our duty as Jedi. We cannot allow Count Dooku and the dark side of the Force to prevail." So it's sort of a catch-22. Like this whole war is a catch-22, right? Because the Jedi should be peacekeepers. At the same time, though, like the cost of not fighting and the cost of letting Dooku and the Separatists win is too great. Clearly, like what they're doing on planets, it's a whole conundrum here. Like the whole war effort is just messy. It's so messy. But at their core, I think the Jedi still want to protect life. However, I think also a lot of their actions are creating more devastation even. Makes me think again of Trace and Rafa, whose parents died because of the Jedi and what they were doing on Coruscant that day, and how a transport rammed into the side of a wall going down the city, and that's how their parents died. Right? It was a classic trolley problem. The Jedi were like, do I let this transport hit a platform full of 100 people, or do I move it out of the way and it slams into a wall? Maybe there will be casualties, right? And that's what happens. And that's the cost of,
wait a second, that's
the tragic
terrible.
cost of war, right? And that I see why people get disillusioned with the Jedi when they do things like that. It's like, is there no other way you could have gone about that situation to prevent any death? And I think just death in any capacity is weighing heavily on Barriss.
Yeah, and I will say that I am not somebody who is so familiar with Barriss' story. I have gotten the lowdown from Brad, who kindly was like, let me spoil the Clone Wars for you. And I look forward to returning to this story once I have seen the Clone Wars arcs that with Barriss in them, and understand her a little bit better, because I do think that this story does a good job of being accessible to all readers and talking about kind of the trauma she's dealing with and the questions that she's dealing with. But I think it's also one that's absolutely probably enhanced with a strong knowledge of her character and the path that she goes on throughout the Clone Wars era.
Well, yeah, because by the time of the Clone Wars, when she's having her tribunal, she says, I've learned that trust is overrated. The only thing the Jedi Council believes in is violence. Which she's not wrong. She's not wrong, right? I mean, the Jedi have fought in this war, and a lot of blood is on their hand, unfortunately. You know, the means by which she tries to portray that message isn't the best, but I understand like where that feeling comes from. We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers, and here we are becoming soldiers. Like, what are we doing here? You know?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is this quote from 130 that I picked up on about this trauma. And it says she was volunteering in the medical clinic and found solace helping out injured Jedi. It says Barriss knew, when they left her care and returned to their missions to fight the Separatists, Barriss knew far too well that their most catastrophic injuries could not be seen. The mental scars and emotional bruises brought a heavy burden. Through the Force, she sensed the turmoil of these Jedi returning into the theater of war, and their pain dismissed her, and her pain distressed her, because she could not heal their deepest wounds.
Ouch. Wow.
I think that's enough to disillusion anybody, even the strongest of hearts and minds, because no human is conditioned to see that much trauma. You know, like there are points in time where EMTs and those sorts of folks who are on the front lines of first responding, like, will quit being in the business because they've seen too much, and because it kind of does a number on their minds. And clearly, through this experience that Barriss is having, you know, she finds solace in helping these folks. However, at the same time, it really, really weighs on her, because she knows, one, she can't fix all the problems, and two, that people are really, really struggling, and they're not in a system that allows them to fix, you know, allows them to work through that. So I get where she gets to where she does. In just her own kind of downfall and the way that darkness consumes her.
Yeah, it's ultimately a story of foreshadowing for Barriss Offee, and she thinks that throughout the war she will be able to help, but it's really sad to see like eventually like where she will get to, and like where it kind of puts what position it puts her in, right? And it's a lot partly due to the Jedi and the fact that, you know, they go through so much trauma, and like, do they have people that actually deal with trauma? Like, do they have Jedi that are helping all the other Jedi who are seeing the violence on the battlefront and like dealing with these, you know, the post-traumatic stress and the nightmares and all of that? Like, are the Jedi able to even like express those emotions, or are they just being used only for war? And I think largely they're probably just being used to wage battles, and it's really a shame where the Jedi got to as part of Republic integration into the army and everything, and that's why they fall.
Yeah, And especially because we love people like Comac Vitus and Orla Jareni, who are way seekers and folklorists and these sorts of kinds of Jedi that we don't hear much about in this time period because everybody's off being a general.
Okay, so next up is Worthless by Delilah Dawson. This was a fun story because it puts Asajj Ventress at a huge disadvantage. She falls down a like a pit, basically, joining the ranks of Ben Solo. And
aren't we all just falling down pits?
Why not? Yeah,
right.
Every day. So she ends up finding a clone trooper in the depths of this like underground temple or these catacombs, and they have to work together to escape. Which this is such a fun trope. I love this so much. Not that there's any sort of romance between these two, but a little bit of tension here and there, kind of like a I will kill you sort of vibe, which is always fun.
There's something a little chaotic, perhaps a little romantic, a little about the I could kill you at any time, and we're in an enclosed sort of space vibe, and I need you to survive.
Yeah. So that's always a fun time.
It's fun.
Yeah. But even adding to a lot of that tension and that angst, their discussions are so interesting because like they're trying to unravel each other and like figure out how they each function and what purpose they each serve. And the clone asks her like, what are you? And she's like, I'm no Sith. I have no kind. I'm just angry, merciless, and burdened with long memory for those who failed me.
LMAO.
And then on the flip side, Asajj sees the clone as worthless. There's the name of the story. And that these clones are really only bred to follow orders and be obedient. And she says, funny that you have no freedom, yet you fight for the freedom of others. And the clone says, I guess that's what sacrifice is, isn't it? Giving up something valuable in the hopes that others can have something even better. She says, I'd call that stupidity. He comes back with the comeback of the century. Maybe that's why you're alone.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a fascinating conversation. And I think it speaks to the clones' loyalty, right? Like that they are willing to sacrifice like their own freedom in the hopes of restoring it to others. And it's also tragic when you think of it in the context of the Clone Wars, because eventually they will take away that freedom from others by instituting the Empire. But Asajj is definitely somebody that is alone at this point, and I think that maybe changes by the time Dark Disciple happens. But yeah, what did you think of Asajj and just the dynamic with these two?
It's interesting because they're both really jabbing at each other in that conversation that you mentioned, because she does make a point when she says, funny that you have no freedom. You were, bred to be a part of this war, yet you fight for the freedom of others. She's not wrong. And of course they have like personal freedom in the sense that they can decide their own personalities and relationships. But at the end of the day, they're still clones. They're still clone army folks. So there's a particular rigidity in that sort of life where you have no chance at freedom, really. But then Doc replies, I guess that's what sacrifice is, isn't it? Giving up something valuable in the hopes that others can have something even better. And like, he's totally right about that idea of sacrifice. Sacrifices are made for ourselves, for our loved ones, in the hopes that the choice that we're making will improve the quality of whatever for somebody else. And a sacrifice can be a powerful thing in that way, because it's a choice that we make to care for others in some ways. Not every sacrifice is the same, but that's kind of the general idea of it. But then, yeah, we get this burn of the century where, again, the clone Doc is totally right. So I don't know. It's really interesting because they're in places where they are both a part of something greater and like physically alone at the same time. And they have to rely on one another in a situation where, given any other circumstances, they would not trust one another.
Mm-hmm. And the most fascinating thing too is like they both leave each other alive at the end of the story. Like Asajj doesn't turn her back on him. He doesn't turn his back on her, and they part ways. And Asajj says like, oh yeah, that's because you're worthless. Like, that's why I'm not even like wasting my breath on killing you. But I also think there's a part of her that's like, he says a lot of really good things. He makes a lot of really great points that like maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but like I applaud the effort. Like I applaud the
conviction.
The conviction, the confidence. Like I'll leave him be. She doesn't say that on the surface, but they both have this sort of mutual respect that's really hidden beneath the surface. And that's what I like the most about it. Like despite the war and despite everything happening, they're able to come together even just for however long it takes them to escape and put aside their differences, even though they are so fundamentally different.
Yeah. And I think that the setting that they're in kind of amplifies how interesting the story is, because we see that they've fallen into this trap, they've fallen into this hole, and they ultimately have to work to get out. And that's why they have to work together. But there's like a stone that amplifies the force on this planet, and they built tests around it for the planet's Jedi, I guess, to determine or help them train like who's a Jedi, and or kind of have them grow their abilities. But they've all kind of died and are gone, and it's a very interesting situation for them to be in. And then on 174, Asajj says, even, or the clone says, even if my origins aren't ideal, at least I know that I'm on the right side of this fight. And Ventress says the right side is the side that wins. And it's really interesting that she says that, because it really feels like a history is written by the winners sort of a vibe. And she's not really wrong about that. The winner kind of gets to decide the narrative. But she is wrong about who's on the right side here,
Right.
because she's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, Asajj is definitely a character that I'm very happy we're getting more. You still got to read Dark Disciple, by the way.
I do.
That is something we should do
behind.
at some point. Yeah, maybe we'll reread it for the pod. But I'm really glad we got more of her in Brotherhood, and then getting her in this with Delilah Dawson's voice. Really good stuff. Like the Asajj fans are being fed.
Yeah, and speaking of characters that we can't help but like love to get more of, could I say Maul? Could I say Maul?
Oh yeah,
it's a Maul story. The Ghosts of Maul by Michael Morokai. This is a Maul story, and oh Maul, what a guy! He's so grumpy.
I loved this story.
I don't have a more eloquent transition than that. He's so grumpy. And this is a story about him being grumpy and everybody pushing at his buttons and making him angry grumpy.
This had like kind of a Christmas Carol vibe to it. I don't know about you. Like, Maul's visiting like a Sith temple on Dathomir. I believe it's Dathomir, or Malachor, one of the two. And he's going through like all these rooms. He faced the three ghosts, Savage, Grievous, and Qui-Gon, right? So kind of like a past, present, future sort of vibe. Like I don't know who the future would be necessarily, but I think Qui-Gon alludes to the future, even though he is a part of his past.
It's the past, the ghosts of past, and past.
Yeah, in a way. But I think the theme of it kind of fits with that, right? And each of these ghosts are trying to push Maul's buttons and get under his skin. And I love it. I love it so much because Maul, he's always been described as this person. I think Freddie Prinze Jr. put it the best when he said he's like Sisyphus, right? He rolls the boulder up the hill only for it to roll back down. And I think literally the story is him rolling up the boulder, getting to the top of that hill, thinking he's going to find some sort of knowledge or artifact or see things in a different light, only to feel nothing at all. And for that boulder to roll back down the hill. And then he's back at square one. And that's the story of Maul every single time.
It really is that way for Maul. Every single time he finds himself back at square one. And Qui-Gon has this great quote towards the end, or Ghost Qui-Gon rather. And he says, you feel pain. And while your anger may be the weapon you use to destroy others, your pain will be the weapon that is used to destroy you.
Yeah. Yeah. He continues on that quote and says, because your desire to cause pain in others will never heal your own, I need you to understand that your destiny is yours to decide. And when that persistent weakness of yours becomes your final failure, it will wound you deeper than any lightsaber could.
Oof.
I think it's so fascinating. Like I think this might be my favorite story in the book. One of them, just the idea that like the final ghost that he faces is Qui-Gon, because that's the one he killed, and ultimately the one to spoiler alert for Star Wars Rebels, just fair warning, you should probably skip the rest of our Maul portion. The one to kill Maul will be Qui-Gon's apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Qui-Gon's
I've heard of
urging
that guy
him
before.
yeah, like Qui-Gon's urging him to like free yourself of the prison of your own making. Like, what good will it do you if you kill your enemies? And it's what he just experienced when he defeated Grievous in the previous room, where he felt no sort of satisfaction. Nothing inside of him felt different. He was just still consumed by that same fury, right? And that is the story of Maul. Like, he thinks that revenge will change how he feels, is ultimately his undoing. And we talk about that word desire, like desire to cause pain in others is what Qui-Gon says. We fast forward to Twin Sons with Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan says, if you define yourself by your power to take life, the desire to dominate, to possess, then you have nothing. And that just sets a fury off in like Maul, right? That's when he finally takes out his lightsaber and like turns it on to duel him in the Tatooine night. And I love how Obi-Wan says, like, look what I've risen above, right? So Maul does not take the words of Qui-Gon here ultimately, and it's his downfall later on.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you talk about desire for revenge, because we get this other great quote from Savage, or the Ghost of Savage, who says, you don't want revenge. Maybe once long ago, that is what drove you, but now you fear. I can feel it in you. What you truly want, Darth Maul, is to not feel powerless. And that goes into like this quest that he's on and how blinded by it that he becomes, that he doesn't even know the motivation for his quest, or doesn't even feel the motivation for his quest in the way that he once did. And now he's just trying to cling on to something that he knows, because he's lost so much over his journey.
Right. And even when he's on death's door and Obi-Wan's arms, like his final words aren't words of hatred, right? I mean, he asks Obi-Wan, is he the chosen one? Like, will he avenge us, or like will he avenge? And Obi-Wan says, like, yeah, he is the chosen one, right? His final question is just like understanding, right, more than anything else, because he's already lost the battle to be powerful and to live on. Like, this is just his final moment. And at his heart, I think maybe there was something good natured within Maul, like deep down, like, but the lust for power was just so overwhelming for him, right? And it's that wound that goes so deep for him. It's a sad story. Maul is one of my favorite characters, right? And I love him so much. I hope we get more Maul in the future.
How can you say no to this grumpy, ragey old man?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So good. I also too love that when
legs.
he like, yeah, absolutely. And I do love too that when he charged forward and started slashing at Qui-Gon, and then he like looks and there's nothing there. It kind of made me think of Kylo when Kylo runs at Luke in Last Jedi and slashes, and his lightsaber goes right through, right? So it's just goes to show that your anger and your hatred gets you nowhere. Important lesson for sure.
Yeah, and I like how the story kind of ends on an open-ended note. My quest for vengeance continues. And he also has the opportunity to destroy the castle out of his rage, and he chooses not to. So maybe there's a journey for him moving forward that's different than the one he's been on so far. We do know where he ends up. However, he ends it with like, JK, my quest for vengeance continues. Like, I will not stop.
Yep, absolutely. So let's talk about Blood Moon Uprising by Vera Strange. What were your thoughts on the story? It's a Darth Vader centric story and shows us his full power and potential, and it's quite terrifying.
Yeah, this is kind of like a story in two pieces, more or less, because we get the beginning with Das Erdal, the commander, on this planet that I am going to try to pronounce. Please laugh with me as I try. Sukimet Surin. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a jungle moon in the mid-rim. And so she's the commander here, and there's this interaction that they have because things are not going to plan. They're not producing as much as they should for the Empire. And then we find Katarina, which is totally how you say your name, even though we have 4 A's and 3 N's. in this Wookiee's name. It's definitely just Katarina.
And a Whiteford Wookiee too at that.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah.
She's
so the
cool.
second part of this is the rebellion of the Wookiees and the rebellion of Katarina specifically. And we get this description of her, and it's like the Wookiee girl was tall, covered head to toe in a thick, shaggy coat of white fur. Sharp canines protruded from her jowls, one of the hallmarks of her kind. And her name is Katarina.
And I find it fascinating that Vader recognizes she's an orphan, and it says, quote, "So they were the same in that then. Vader understood the rage she carried." That was really interesting.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, like a little bit of Vader acknowledging his former self, the fact that he lost his mom here. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I thought this was a fun story. Like, just seeing Vader like go through the jungle gave me some Lords of the Sith vibes, like from Paul Kemp.
Mm-hmm.
That story was one where Vader is just kind of lurking through the jungle and facing all these sorts of monsters and running into groups of the rebellion. And this felt like a mini version of that. But what I also liked too, there was one descriptor at one point about the pollution going into the air and all the sludge that was like running off of the dam and like going through the stream that wove its way through the jungle. And I thought that was really a alarming description, because Star Wars is kind of this story of like technology versus nature, and the way that technology sort of overpowers nature and some of the issues with that. And I thought this was like a way to show the impact that the Empire has, and how it destroys worlds and it takes from worlds and it ruins the more natural side of the galaxy, right? To excavate resources and to displace people. I just thought that like little descriptor was important too. And like, I can see why Katarina carries this rage, because if this is her home world, like she wants to fight for it. Like, these people want to fight for this world, because I don't get the sense that there's some sort of base here. It's just the people on that planet finally rising up and saying enough is enough. Like, this is our home and we want to fight for it. Like, willing to blow up their own dam in order to do that.
Yeah, there's something to be said about like the environment and the way that people who live on the land are treated when invaders come into their space and start to make it their own or say that it's their own. And I really admire the story of Katarina in this one, because she's young, she is a Wookiee character, but she's fierce, and she really perseveres throughout this story against what feels like an unstoppable odd in Vader, this kind of unstoppable force. So I really like that as well. I think that there's one line in here you talked up top about describing the story about like Vader at his best and most intimidating, and there's this great quote from 226 to 227. So there's something that Vader says, and then it says, Vader said in his imposing deep voice, it was as much a weapon as the silence that had preceded it. He wielded both with an extreme control and precision, just like his lightsaber. And having seen episode 6 of Kenobi and understanding the power of the Vader voice. Yep, that's all I have to say about that. Yep. Great quote.
I love that. I always love with Vader when the Imperials talk to him, especially in the beginning. There's that one Imperial who welcomes him and is like trying to talk to him, and he's just silently striding through the different rooms, and it's just like, quiet Vader is terrifying, because you don't know what his next move is, you don't know what he's thinking, and that's the menacing nature of this character. Is he's masked. You don't see behind those bulbous eyes and that slotted breather on his face. Like, you just don't know, just the breathing and just the silence, and it's just terrifying. That's why he's one of the greatest villains of all time. I think, like, honestly, I want more Vader. I would be excited for more Vader, now that we've seen how successful he can be in the Kenobi series with the re-speecher and with the stunt doubles that are helping out.
Sure.
I would love more Vader, because I think he's a fun character, and it taps back into that childhood fear of watching him on the screen.
Sure, I understand that for sure. That then brings us to our next story, which is Luke on the Bright Side by Sam Maggs. Yeah, I, first of all, love the title of this story, love the vibe of this story. And it is a story about Hoth and about Luke and Alliance Special forced to hang out with Luke. Rhea Hollis of Naboo, we find out. So this would get like a dual first person point of view in this story. They're kind of like building the tunnels and figuring it all out on Hoth now that they had to evacuate Yavin 4. And yeah, this story is delightful. I don't know what you thought about this one, but I had a great time reading this one.
Yeah, it was really fun. I thought Luke was portrayed in a really funny way, like especially all the puns that he makes, like the one you just said. He says that the only problem with Hoth is it's not exactly hospitable. And I'm just like, I used to have a lisp when I was young, so I would pronounce my S's as THs. Took a lot of like speech speech therapy to get through that. But I really related to that line, especially because of it.
But also like it's a great pun. It's a pun worthy of a podcast for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There were so many layers for me personally there. And also too, he mentions to himself, I've always needed to be helpful, mostly of use. That's what my Aunt Beru liked to call me in the sweetest way. She didn't have a not sweet bone in her body. And then parentheses, her bones, ... Don't think about that. And I was like, whoa. I was like, that's a really deep cut.
After episode 6, it becomes a different of Kenobi. It comes a different sort of feeling when you hear that.
Yeah.
Which is all I have to say.
Also, Luke, she definitely did have a not sweet bone in her body because she punched an Inquisitor in the face. So let's talk about that.
She did that out of sweetness. Let's be very clear.
It was a punch of gratitude. But exactly. Yeah, I enjoyed this. I think for me, like one of my favorite parts of the story was actually going back to Kenobi right in the beginning. Luke is talking about being afraid of the dark, which I thought was interesting, and how he's talking about space being like the truest form of darkness. It's like it's like a blackness that's empty and predictable. Like that blackness is empty and predictable and the least scary part of space. But what's truly terrifying is the stuff that shows up in space, like the asteroids, the solar flares, the star destroyers. And I love how it provides that visual of like things protruding from space unexpectedly. Like if you're flying and you have everything in front of you, and to see like a star destroyer like come out of hyperspace, like imagine the feeling of that, like how terrifying that is to experience that. But also him describing that darkness in space without those things is very freeing, and space is kind of just there waiting for you to exist in it. So I thought that was cool. And like the fact that the darkness he's experiencing on Hoth is definitely a little different. But ultimately he's not afraid of the dark. He's more afraid of what he might become if he spends too long in it. So there's a little bit of layers there, tapping into the dark side. Like he's afraid of what he will become. And this is interesting because it's before he knows Vader is his father's, right? So he's not even thinking of that kind of context of like, oh, my father fell, right? He's not there yet, which it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating. But I loved getting this Luke specifically in this moment at this time.
Yeah, I don't consider myself like the hugest Luke fan. Like I'm no Luke stan. I'm a grumpy old man Luke stan. But I found myself like really endeared to this Luke. And I loved this discussion of being afraid of the dark and talking about what Tatooine is like at night, as you mentioned, and just also how the darkness of space. I loved getting that internal monologue from him and really understanding him better. And I also loved his quippiness. Like he's silly, but he's also really, really earnest when he sees the fly, and he's like turning to Rhea and is like, look at this awesome fly. Aren't you so fascinated by this? And here's all the facts about it. And I was like, this is so sweet. And obviously like Rhea does not give a single crap. I do just want to say this is an excellent base. This story, the dual POV, the force to hang out with me, the I don't want to be here vibes. It could be a romance. That's all I'm saying. It's a great setup for a romance.
Luke is not straight in my opinion.
Well, so there you go. It's a romance. But I really liked how we kind of got him understanding a little bit more about the fly and his kind of fascination with the wildlife. And that leads us to the big ice monster at the end, that he was like, oh yeah, I thought because the fly was here, it would make sense that this other thing would be here. So there's a continuity there, which I liked. We haven't mentioned how Luke finds out that Rhea is from Naboo, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and Luke being like, oh, I think I've heard of that. I'm like, Luke, your mom is from there.
Yeah, but it's okay. So 270, wind over sand reaching out, I saw and felt so much water and so much green. Your home is beautiful. And like that just like broke my heart. It broke my heart. Luke could have had that, you know?
Mm-hmm. That like a childhood on Naboo with his mom.
Yeah, he could have had that. But also, you know, we never see a connection between like Luke and his mom really often. And this is a beautiful connecting point for that in this story. And then of course, Rhea is like, I meant the accented E at the end of my name. Like that's what people understand as like being a hallmark of Naboo naming conventions. Not looking into my brain, you know? So it becomes a funny mix up, and also totally the plot of the romance story. I'm just saying.
You make a good point. I wish I could see a story where Luke does go to Naboo. I don't think we have seen that, but we see where like Leia goes to Naboo in the comics. I would love Luke to visit and see if he like learns anything. I know like the Santeca clan is from there, so you know, maybe, or at least some of the Santekas live there in the High Republic. So maybe Lore Santeca was there at once, and maybe he went with Luke. I don't know. That's a good story that could be written somewhere, is all I'm saying. Give me more of Luke connecting to his mom. We get a lot of Luke and his dad, but need more mothers in Star Wars, please.
Star Wars, what? Yeah, no, I really like this connection, and overall, I just really enjoyed the story. I hope somebody writes fanfic of this story. That's it. That's all I'm saying. I had a great time. More from Sam Mags.
Please. So our next story here is the penultimate one, is Masters by Tessa Gratton, and this is a unique one because it puts us in the seat of Emperor Palpatine right before Vader and Luke arrive on the Death Star. So a lot of the story is a bit of a recap of like the battle on Coruscant, like in Revenge of the Sith. And it is fun to like go back through those motions and like re-experience that. But I think ultimately the important part is like the context that it is setting up, which is that like here is Palpatine waiting for Vader and Luke eventually, who will come in later, you know, that day or that week or whatever. And then on the flip side, you have Yoda in his hut accepting death and becoming one with the Force and transforming into the Force. And it's just so interesting that you have like these two people who are so powerful, probably the most powerful on each side of the Force spectrum, like Jedi and Sith. This is like the ultimate story of Jedi and Sith, right? These two Goliaths who fought each other once Order 66 was executed, and they fought, and now here they are, like at the end of their life, basically. At least for Yoda, and Palpatine returns somehow eventually. But I thought it was really cool how it was framed. What did you think of like seeing these two and what will be their final moments at this point in time?
I think it's really interesting to connect these two in this story. Like obviously they're connected through that fight in Rots and just as you said, kind of being the most powerful, but I don't think that us as viewers often connect Palpatine and Yoda on the day-to-day. And it just struck me as really interesting to put these two perspectives together and kind of get a new view of these two kind of major scenes throughout the saga. And I enjoyed that. I found that really, really interesting. Another thing that I liked from this is right in the beginning, we kind of get a description of Death Star 2 and like how it's going on Death Star 2, and also what was most important for Palpatine. And what's really interesting in the beginning there is it says the power required, to keep the Death Star in place is slowly breaking up the little green moon, but that is an unexpected casualty. The Death Star is meant to destroy everything it touches. Because like what's keeping the Death Star at the forest moon of Endor is like an anchor from the moon itself, which is killing the moon. Which is just like an interesting thing to think about. I don't know if I've ever thought about that before. Of course, the way that the Empire is doing its Empire things, that makes sense because it's an Empire, but yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that part of it with Endor and like how it might be actually destroying the world. Like obviously it's there as a presence, but I wonder, what would the Death Star have done had it lived longer to that planet? But I think to Palpatine's plan, thinking that this will work and that the Death Star will have this revival, I love that he is just so overconfident. And that's what Luke tells him in the throne room. Like he's like, your overconfidence is your weakness. And Palpatine says, your faith in your friends is yours. Right.
And he literally is so chilling in a tower. He's literally chilling in a tower.
Yeah.
Like he's like, yes, I at the top of the tower on the Death Star is his most brutal throne room. It is new. He has never been here until now, but he looks forward to spending much time here.
Yeah. This is really a story of his overconfidence, truly. Like,
totally.
He does mention that he set out Inquisitors to try to find Yoda with like Imperial probes, and he had considered like various arcane Sith rituals to find that thread or that echo in the Force that would lead him to Yoda. But ultimately, he decided like, why waste my time on this on Yoda? Like, he's just not a threat to me. And it's so funny that like Yoda is totally that bitch in the story, right? Because Yoda dies, and he shows up as a Force ghost in the throne room, which I love. This is so cool. And he doesn't even say anything. He just kind of sits there and he tilts his head at one point. It almost feels like he is playing with Palpatine. He's toying with him because Palpatine has been so overconfident that he's completely missed the fact that Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi hid these two children for so long. And now Leia's faith in her brother and then her brother's faith in their father will ultimately be the thing that destroys Palpatine and is his undoing. And Force Ghost Yoda just says, win, you cannot. And then Palpatine turns around and he's like gone all of a sudden, right? So I think that's just so cool. There's not many words that have to be spoken by Yoda because Yoda already knows, like, you underestimated us, actually. So prepare yourself.
Yeah. I don't know if I have anything else to add, but yes.
So good. I just love the idea of our Force Ghost Yoda showing up and being like, okay, I just died. I'm going to go haunt Palpatine for a minute.
Right. Like, it's so silly and perfect. And
the fact they haven't seen each other since that battle in Revenge of the Sith.
Yes.
This will be his first time seeing Yoda. Which
is why putting these two perspectives together is so interesting. I think what I also like about this is the added context of Kenobi and just how this saga continues to get fleshed out. And I'm also excited that this is the first of Tessa Gratton's stories we're reading in Star Wars, and we're going to continue to get her work in the High Republic. So I'm looking forward to it. I think with that, it brings us to our final story, which is Through the Turbulence by Roseanne A. Brown, which is, yes, a sequel. I'm sorry, does a sequel trilogy exist? Yes, it does. It's a Rey story, ladies and gentlemen. Perfect use of the hooray. I love that this book ends with Rey, because like in the timeline, she's the last biggest hero. But we had to include her, right? And so in this story, we are getting a post Last Jedi story where we have Rey and Poe, who are essentially on a like supply run, and they're going to get some stuff on this planet. And there's this big fog coming, and they only have a couple hours to be on the planet's surface before they have to get off. And surprise, BB-8 gets captured. They have to go after him. And oh no, the fog is coming in. So this is that kind of story. We see Poe and Rey's relationship kind of evolve over this story. We see delightful BB-8 moments. And this is in a lot of ways a story about grief and bottling your emotions, and also learning to work with others and to understand others better and to trust others.
Yeah, I find it really touching that Rey is getting by with the help of her friends. You know, she looked up to Luke so much as a mentor, and the loss of him definitely sits with her. She thinks about him fading away. She still thinks about the throne room with Kylo and his betrayal from her perspective. And she had put so much trust in him as well. And he ended up sort of just becoming the supreme leader and turning a blind eye to her to the point where she shuts him off, right? With the Falcon visual at the end of Last Jedi.
Yep.
And so she's sort of left alone. And I think this story is, telling her she's not alone. She never will be. She's got her friends to help out. And for Poe to relate to her with all the things that he's dealing with around Holdo and how he treated Holdo in The Last Jedi and how he's feeling regretful from that. And he describes it as like the turbulence, the cloud of turbulence that you hit. It's temporary. It's there. It definitely sucks as you fly through it, but eventually there will be a clearer side that you fly into. Right. And I think that helps her to realize she's not the only one going through this. And she does struggle with the Force. I mean, that's presented in this story and in the comics. I forget what the comic is called, but it's pre-Tross, after TLJ. And also a Spark of Resistance, Rey is dealing with connecting to the Force and having trouble with that. So it's a defining characteristic of her during this time, for sure.
Yeah, and I really like that it's being explored in this sort of story because it's another one, as I talked about earlier. I love it when Kidlit can deal with big things and really make them accessible for young people. And I think this kind of story about grief and how to work through some of those big feelings is really well on display here. And I really like how we both get Rey's point of view with the Force and how she's not talking to anybody, even General Organa, because she fears, kind of what they'll think. But also Poe saying back to her, like, yeah, I've struggled with what happened with Holdo and I kind of have to work through that too. I think that's a really kind of soft, emotional side of Poe that we don't always get. So I appreciated both of those perspectives in all of this. And, found this story to be really thoughtful, even through all the adventure.
Mm-hmm. And also, too, Poe saying that the Resistance doesn't demand perfection from its members, Rey. If you're willing to stand with us, you belong with us. And it fits into that original mentality of the rebellion, which is like, some people come from backgrounds that they started with the rebellion and that's where they've always believed in. Some people defect from the Empire or the First Order and want to join the fight because they realize the wrongdoings of those bigger powers. And it's okay. Like Iden Versio, it's okay that you were a part of Inferno Squad. Like, we don't demand perfection. And that's a conversation that Poe also has in Resistance Reborn about how they all come from different walks of life. I remember that speech that he gives to that group of people to say, like, you come from this and you come from that, but it's okay because we're here and we're all willing to stand together. And that's like the thing that matters the most. So I think it's good for Rey to hear that as well, to remember that people come from messy backgrounds. People make mistakes. Doesn't make you any less worthwhile of a Resistance member than anybody else. Like, we each have our own stories to tell and we each work through it to make a better future. Like, what matters now is what we do in the moment that's given to us and into the future, right? Like, we can't fix our past mistakes. We can try to be a better person. That's the key.
Yeah, and I think you mentioning that quote from Poe, doesn't demand for perfection, also goes back to one of our favorite squads, Alphabet Squad, and where they all come from. And I also think that as we talked about in episode 6 of Kenobi, I just keep bringing it up, but the parallels are there. There are really, I really think Star Wars at its best is a thoughtful conversation about the power of compassion, the power of forgiveness, and the power of resistance. And specifically, like, compassion and understanding, because the Resistance could shun away anybody who's coming from the Empire and say, no, you hurt us, we don't want you here. But they are choosing to say, no, I'm going to embrace you. We have fighting the same fight. We have the same goals, and I'm going to bring you in and rope you in, as opposed to shun you. And I think that's a really powerful tool in society where we could be pushing people away. And so I think those lessons are important because sometimes we do push people away.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our book discussion on Stories of Jedi and Sith. Did you have any other final thoughts?
I do. I would just like to mention, I'm going to find the quote and just talk about myself finding the quote until I find it. It is from this last story here, and it's just a silly. You could call
I love a good Star Wars silly.
Odd and end if you would like. So we have our good buddies Poe and Rey finding the Kugai, a tall race rivaling Wookiees in height, but with scaly purpley skin instead of fur and 6 arms instead of 2. Wow. All 3 hissed something at Poe in a lyrical language that neither he nor Rey understood. He blinked in surprise before flashing his tried and true Dameron smile. We come in peace? That's it. That's all I've got for you.
Oh my gosh. I love that. Yep. I love that so much.
Happy reading. That's all I've got.
Once again, we really enjoyed reading these stories, and I want to ask you, we can each give our thoughts, but do you have a stories of blank and blank that we'd like to see in the future? For me, it is like I would love a stories of like Rebel and Imperial, and we get that nuance of characters who are on each sides of the war, but also maybe the gray area in between.
Callus story.
Yes. We can get Iden, Callus, we can get Bail Organa, Cassian, Jin. Like we get a ton of characters who participate during the time of the rebellion. That is like my dream, I think, to see some of those stories. But what would you like to see?
Oh, that's like a really, really good question. I have like 8 different thoughts going through my head. It sounds so bad of me. I would love a politicians book. Like give me the Padme, the Bail, the Mon Mothma, the Tia Toon, the Satine, even
Masameda,
Sly Moore, Palpatine. There's somebody, who am I thinking of in Bloodline? Lady Carice Sindian. Just like give me all these random politicians talking about their views of things. I don't think that would sell well, but I do think it would be really interesting for me specifically. That, or I would love High Republic Jedi.
Yeah.
Like give me the Elzar, Avar, Stellan, Loden.
Oh my gosh, Stories of Light and Life.
Yeah, that's it. Do
it, Lucasfilm. Oh my gosh. Oh god, now I can't get it out of my mind. I'm gonna be so mad if it doesn't happen. Well, we really enjoyed this, and we hope you all had fun tuning into our discussion going into this. But yeah, hopefully we can say this is not the last time we'll dive into one of these books. But until then, everybody, make sure to be following Sarah and I on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads. Follow the podcast wherever you listen. Please leave us a 5-star written review if you could. Helps other folks find the show, makes us feel good, lets us know what we're doing right, and it brings in more friends of the Force to this podcast.
Yeah, and also, if you would, like Levi, have a favorite bookstore or a new bookstore you've found, please send us an email through our website or give us a DM on Twitter or Instagram. We would love to hear where you love to visit your independent local bookstore. And we also have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1, and we are super uber grateful for all of our patrons who help make this show happen every week. They are Amy, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Carol, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Davis, Dylan, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Levi, Leon, Lucy, Luke, Lindsay, Randy, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Steven, Travis, and T.
Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.